Donald Trump's response to Russia's testing of both the Poseidon underwater torpedo and the Burevestnik missile. The United States has more nuclear weapons than any other countries. This was accomplished, including a complete update and renovation of existing weapons during my first term. He hated this, he says. Russia has the second number of nuclear weapons, China distant third, but he has instructed the Department of War to begin nuclear tests. Vladimir Putin has awarded the developers of the Burevestnik missile
the nuclear-powered, nuclear-capable Burevestnik missile and the Poseidon underwater autonomous vehicle. I'd like to thank all of the design bureaus and collectives who participated in the development. The results that you have achieved are absolutely historical. They're important for the strategic parity of our country. In fact, they provide a strategic parity for the whole 21st century.
So after this, he says, but I think foreign specialists were also able to see all of this for themselves, because during the Burevestnik 21 test, there was a NATO reconnaissance ship constantly present in the area. We didn't interfere with its operations. We let them watch. And what is your assessment of Trump's response?
First, it's a complete role reversal from what was what I saw during the Cold War. And what I mean by that is, back in 1980, 81, when I was teaching at American University in the Washington semester program, I took a group of college juniors and seniors down to the then Soviet embassy. And this was all during the time that the United States was deploying a Pershing missile into Europe. And the Soviets were very defensive. I mean, and they basically said, "Yeah, we got that too. Yeah, we're good." It was not one of confidence; it was one of lack of confidence. Now I'm watching Donald Trump act like those Soviet officials back in 1981. That we got more than you. He's turned it into a measuring contest, and not dealing with the fact that Russia has now deployed what is literally a game changer. Having a nuclear reactor as the power plant on board one of these missiles now completely, it even changes how you do nuclear arms control agreements. Because in the past, we would have, we got an agreement for those intercontinental ballistic missiles, because they can go 5,000 miles or more. And then we got an agreement for those intermediate range nuclear missiles, because they can only go up to 2,000 miles. And then we got the short range, Well, this one it's all three. It's short, it's medium, it's long, and frankly, is it eternal? It'll have a finite lifespan, but, and I've seen some comments by some former Pentagon officials, one of whom I know and like, but he was saying, "Oh, this is nothing. This is nothing new. We tried it back in '64. It didn't work. So the Russians obviously have the same crappy system we did." Sorry, wrong. What Russia now has created is a missile that can stay aloft. We don't know how long. I don't want to hear people say, "Oh, it'll be 6 months or a week or a year," or we don't know. We haven't tested it ourselves, and all the Putin said that they did the Chauncey Gardner move, which, you remember the movie Being There with Peter Sellers. He was Chauncey Gardner, and he said, "I like to watch." Okay, U.S. got the watch, and we watched it fly around. We don't know for how long. Was it 14 hours, 14 days? But Russia has achieved a significant breakthrough here, which now they don't have to worry about getting their missiles out of the silo quick. In fact, they could pre-deploy these and just send them off, that they're there ready to go, and remind the West that, look, we've already got nuclear weapons up in the air and ready to strike. And you're not going to know where they are, and you're not going to be able to take them out. So let's talk instead of make threats with each other.
Of course, this comes as the New START treaty is set to expire. And as you saw from Trump's reaction to these tests by Russia, there is all of this urgency now to, quote unquote, test U.S. nuclear weapons. What do you make of all this?
First of all, the man doesn't know what he's talking about. That's nothing new about Donald Trump. But this is a very dangerous regime to be ignorant in. Just take his statement about who has the most weapons. Well, what are you talking about, Donald? Are you talking about warheads? Are you talking about delivery vehicles? Are you talking about dual-use vehicles that can be seconded as delivery vehicles? What are you talking about, Donald? You don't know what you're talking about. If you're talking about warheads, the Russians have a few more than we do. So that was a stupid statement to make. We tracked the destruction of some 30,000 warheads on both sides, roughly 28 on our side and 30,000 on their side. That was the intention anyway, was to go down to almost nothing. We didn't get that far, but we tracked it pretty closely, and I have no doubt that we're still tracking pretty closely what warheads are on each side. And that's my primary measurement is warheads. Delivery vehicles are important. Dual-use vehicles are important. All those things can cause cheating or compliance. But the warheads is the significant thing. And as Larry has pointed out, delivery vehicles become important when they are vastly different, if you will, and offer you a completely new regime of using those warheads, which is apparently what's happening with this new missile. And we don't know how many different classes they might be working on with regard to it. But the one that we have seen and heard about is probably, as Larry says, is dangerous enough. But Donald needs to understand what he's talking about before he starts talking about it, and he doesn't. And as I said, this is an extremely dangerous regime for the chief of a state, the head of the country, if you will, to not know anything about. And he doesn't. It's clear that he doesn't. It's clear that he doesn't understand it. He doesn't know what's going on. Now, at the same time, I have to add that I've been aware for some time, and I can't talk very much about this, of a capability that we have that rivals and surpasses Poseidon. No question in my mind. I've seen it demonstrated. That's all I can say. So I don't even know if Donald knows about that. I hope he doesn't, frankly. It's a very, very, shall we say, code-worded program and very much not for public distribution. And that's about all I can say about that. But I will tell you that he doesn't know what he's talking about, and that's scary. I'll repeat that. It's frightening that a man who talks about the CTBT and doesn't have a clue as to what the CTBT is. One of the reasons we moved into that regime, when I say we, all of us who were doing significant aerial, if you will, airborne in the atmosphere testing, was because when we did the super bomb, the fission fusion bomb, we weren't sure we didn't rip the atmosphere in a way that was not conducive to human life. And that got people thinking deeply that Dr. Teller might have been a little bit wrong with what he was talking about with combining fusion and fission. And maybe we were going to do really irretrievable destruction and maybe even hurt the planet badly. And so we stopped atmospheric testing, and then we stopped underground testing. We stopped all testing. And everyone agreed to it, even though no one ratified the Treaty of Consequence. And the only reason China and others of consequence didn't ratify the treaty is because they were following our lead. We wouldn't ratify the treaty. When Secretary Powell tried to bring the Law of the Sea Treaty, a farce, an absolute farce that we haven't ratified that, shows you how stupid our Senate is. Before the Senate, we wanted to bring the CTBT up too. It didn't get past Dick Cheney's door, showing you how stupid Dick Cheney was, because we couldn't even get him to approve our going over to the Senate and at least trying to get one or both of those treaties ratified. That's how stupid we are today. And Donald Trump is just deepening and making more profound that stupidity.
Defense Minister Belousov made comments in a meeting with Vladimir Putin's cabinet. Here is how he is reacting to Donald Trump's threats of nuclear weapons tests.
It's a comprehensive set of activities that may include actual nuclear tests. And this greatly increases the level of nuclear danger for Russia. This means that we must keep our nuclear arsenal ready to deliver unacceptable damage to any opponent, and we must respond to Washington's steps so as to ensure the security of our country. Considering all of the above, I think it is expedient to start preparing for full-scale nuclear tests immediately. Our Novaya Zemlya testing range has all the infrastructure for that.
Well, this is not good news because Trump's reckless comments are escalating the danger. The one thing, during my 12 days in Moscow recently, the one thing I did hear about repeatedly from a variety of sources, both military and civilian, as well as people connected politically, is the grave concern about Trump deploying Tomahawk missiles. Not because each missile is necessarily so powerful, but because those missiles are capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. And the Russians do not want to be in the position of having to try to guess whether or not there is a nuclear warhead on board. And again, what Trump didn't understand with respect to the new weapon platforms that Putin announced a week ago is that these are not actual weapons. They're not carrying a nuke automatically. But Trump conflated that with having to immediately test nuclear warheads, which from what I've read, that's at least 3 years away, 36 months off, if they started last week when Trump made the announcement. So this Russia's not going to back down. They're not going to be bullied. They're not going to be intimidated, but they are going to respond calmly and firmly. But this calmness and firmness hides the fact that this thing could escalate quickly, and get beyond the control of any country.
Also, another place where he's ignorant, or he's just speaking off the top of his head, not listening to anyone who is expert, is we have ways to test our stockpile that don't require underground or atmospheric testing, don't require the actual explosion of a nuclear warhead. And I've been present when we did several in the Pacific, and it's a pretty thorough process. You can do it in two ways, and usually we do it both ways, so to confirm each with the other. One way is called subcritical, where you don't get to the point where it would explode, physically explode. And the other way is computer modeling in computers. And we were perfectly content in the military to watch this process happen in Hawaii and to understand that the stockpile was reasonably sound. I would have given it a 95 to 99%. There's always that 1% or so of certitude that, yeah, you load one of these up and fire it, it's going to go off. You don't have to test.
Why is Donald Trump acting so stunned about what Russia has accomplished here? Because Russia has not really kept anything, quote unquote, secret. They've conducted these tests and now are talking about them quite publicly. Vladimir Putin also said there's another missile coming on the way, a heavy ICBM called the Sarmat, which will be fully operational next year. Why is Trump acting so stunned? What is the context here for the kind of panic we are seeing coming from him? To me, it doesn't seem to make much sense because everyone in the United States, in Washington, should know Russia has nukes, and Russia also has a very advanced military-industrial complex currently in partially at war with the United States.
It's either deliberate ignorance or it's a Claude Rains performance. Rains was the actor in the movie Casablanca, the police chief, who was shocked to discover gambling going on in the casino. So, it could be that Trump is feigning shock and outrage at something that he actually knows about. And it's his attempt at a negotiating ploy. But I'm inclined to believe it's more on the ignorance front. And I disagree with your premise, Danny, that there are people who know and are keeping the president informed. Well, one of the most striking things I observed in Moscow, compared it to the States, is across the board here in the United States, the commentators former military personnel in particular, the Jack Keynes, David Petraeus, Ben Hodges, Admiral Stavridis, when they go on television and talk about the Russians, they do so within the most insulting, demeaning terms. Russians are terrible. They're incompetent. They're no good. They're they're always talking them down. In other words, underestimating Russia's capabilities. By contrast, what I saw and heard from a variety of generals, both active and retired, Lieutenant General Apti Aludinov in particular, he's still active duty. General Evgeny Buzhinsky he's been retired, but he dealt extensively with American and British and NATO generals over the years. The Russians speak of Western military with respect, not insults, not demeaning comments, not dismissive comments. They take Western military capabilities seriously. They don't laugh at them. They don't ridicule them. Now, candidly, I think they've got ample room to ridicule a lot about the West. But I was struck that this was a consistent attitude, mindset that the Russians demonstrated vis-a-vis the West. In contrast, the West completely dismisses Russia. And it's that arrogance, that hubris in the West, where we assume we're the best, like Trump, we're the best. Nobody's better than us. And go, hey, Don, how'd we do in Vietnam, man? In fact, more recently, how'd we do with those Houthis? So the reality that the United States hasn't actually won a war against anybody that could be considered near peer since World War II is an indictment of our system. And yet we continue to parade around like we are the best athlete that's ever lived, the most intelligent scientist that's ever worked, and refusing to accept or acknowledge what others like Russia and China have actually accomplished.
Well, I agree with Larry. One of the first principles of war is not to underestimate your enemy. And the opposite of that, or the parallel of that, the corollary of that, is not to laugh in his face, not to call him a paper tiger, particularly when he's not a paper tiger. That's dangerous. And I go back to the nuclear realm. In the nuclear realm, it's increasingly dangerous because we have no treaties left. We're not talking. We're not doing any of the things that we learned to do and did so assiduously and frequently and consistently during the Cold War. We talked, we looked, we examined, we verified, we tested, and I don't mean testing nuclear warheads. We looked at things as if the enemy was real, significant, and warranted our looking, warranted our verification, warranted our business with him when it was come time to sign treaties and make sure they were verifiable and as good as they could be. We're doing none of that now. We're acting as if not only are we king of the world, but no one else out there has any antagonism towards us, or if they do, we'll smush them like a bug. That's not the case. It's certainly not the case anymore. As Larry pointed out, we couldn't even smash Al-Ansar, the Houthis. And we've had a hard time smashing others since 9/11 that we set out to smash. We set out to obliterate. We have obliterated no one. We got more terrorists in the world right now than we had on the day before 9/11. Many of them created out of motivation made by us. We are a disaster when it comes to what we call the rules-based order because, one, we're destroying that order, and two, we're putting nothing in its place except bombast, and three, the bombast is just that, There's really not muscle behind it.
Larry, isn't that the problem here, though, to what Colonel Wilkerson was saying? This push to obliterate, whether you can or not, eventually leads to this possibility that there will be a country, there will be people around the world who will want to protect themselves from that, leading to these advances that Russia has made. So isn't this part of the root problem that the United States just isn't even engaging in diplomacy, doesn't know how to retreat?
You know, underlying your question is the assumption that the United States has a strategy, and clearly we do not. And when I'm talking, when you're starting to think strategically, you've got to start asking, certain fundamental questions. What kind of resource base do we have? Are we dependent on anything outside of us? Or, if we had to, not that we'd want to, but if we had to build a wall around ourselves, could we survive and actually live comfortably? The U.S. has not done that kind of thinking at all. We've just assumed, hey, we're the biggest, we're the baddest on the planet. Nobody can match up with us, and therefore we can throw our weight around and tell others what to do. This is one of the other things I came away from Moscow with an understanding of. The Russian approach is the exact opposite of a zero-sum game. The West lives by the zero-sum game. We win, you lose. There's no in between. You submit, you bow the head, get down on your knees, accept your vassal status, do as you're told, do what we tell you to do, and enjoy it. Well, nobody likes living under that kind of ruler, and that inevitably leads to revolt. Whereas the Russian approach is quite different, because they're not seeking to impose their will on other countries. And people say, "Oh, wait a second, what are they doing in Ukraine?" Oh, Ukraine's different because this was provoked by NATO expanding continuously to the east and posing a direct military threat to Russia. But when you look at Russia's dealings, whether it's with China, with India, which are big countries, or even smaller countries like Iran, and you go further into the global south and into Africa, you don't find Russia being in this position of saying, basically, you do it my way or you hit the highway. They look for a conciliatory approach. So this lack of strategy on the part of the United States is what's so dangerous, because we've convinced ourselves that we can always kill our way out of a problem, and that by killing and destroying, that we can come out victorious. And it's been really, if we look carefully at the history of particularly the last 70 years, it tells a very different story, that all of our violence, all of our killing hasn't made us safer, richer, or more secure.
Yeah, let's just let's do a little map here. You're on a huge, tall tower out in the central Atlantic, and you're standing up there and you're looking at what you can see from there. And what you can see from there is all the way in the midway, say past the Urals in Russia, down through the Caucasus. You can see what's happening in the world. And what you're looking at is you're seeing almost nothing except commerce and other things related to trade coming from that direction, the direction of China and Russia and other countries in that way, coming this way. You're seeing a deep sea fishing fleet, for example, of China that has over 6,000 ships, many of which are bigger than mainline combatants in the United States Navy, and several of which are armed to the teeth. But they're not killing people, they're fishing. They might be a little predatory in the way they're fishing, but they're fishing. They're doing commerce, they're doing trade. And you're looking down towards Ramstein and you see a constant flow of things coming from the empire, all over the empire. And they're going to Ramstein, and then they're going to the greatest genocide on the face of the earth, even worse than Sudan. equaling some of the things that Hitler did in the 40s. And you're watching another train, not quite as big, but it's going up towards metaphoric train. It's going up towards Murmansk and on into the Arctic Circle and trying to do the same thing up there. And it's all military. There's no trade associated with it. And then you're looking at another one that's funneling weaponry into the heart of Europe for the battle in Ukraine. And I could go on and on and on, and you're not seeing anything coming back the other way towards America. You have to conclude, if you're up on top of that tower with that kind of visibility, that the one behind you, to the west, as it were, the American empire, oh, I left out all the weapons and ships flowing down towards Venezuela. You have to conclude that the empire, such as it is insane. And just as Larry said, has no visible, workable, certainly, strategy. It's just doing things to be doing them. And it's doing them in concert with more or less someone in the White House who doesn't seem to really know what he's doing. And if you're on top of that tower, which do you think is the best situation and which the most dangerous? I don't think there's any decision to be made there.